All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Um, I do apologize for the recording. I just had some personal events that I was unable to move, or for professional and for work-related reasons. Nevertheless, we have a recording today that we are going to crack on with, and today we're going to be looking at anatomy and physiology, and specifically we're going to be looking at major muscle groups as well as exercise variations. Now, when we look at this, I think it's very important for us. This is going to be a very straightforward lecture, a very um, you know, um, lecture that is not going to be as technical as we've had before. But what I'd ask all of you to do again is understand why we are doing what we're doing in the way that we are doing it. So if we look at from the very beginning, I mean, we've gone through the planes and axes before, right? We've gone through the periodization before. We've done all these various different things. We've done an element of nutrition, etc., etc., etc. So what we need to look at from here onwards, and granted you may not have had some of those lectures before, we'll have them again in due course. But the main thing to look at from here is how can we simplify it into the major muscle groups, and how then from there can we identify what specific exercises we want to execute regarding those major muscle groups. And more often than not, it is actually quite simple. It is actually quite easy for individuals or clients to generate adequate muscle growth with the right principles, the right intensity, and the right execution. But we cannot do that if we do not know where the muscles are, how do they function effectively, what do we want to get out of them. And that's what I think a lot of the time as trainers, we're very quick to just throw a program together. But what is the end goal? How are you going to get your client to adequately partake in their programming so they can also see progress? How are they going to gauge that progress? So when we start to look at exercise variation, when we start to look at major muscle groups, how do they function? What are compound exercises going to do for that muscle group? What are isolation exercises? What are the pitfalls of certain compound or isolation movements? But what are the pros there that you're going to get with specific compound or isolation movements? So looking at all of those is going to be of the utmost importance. But all in all, it's for you to understand exactly what you want your client to achieve on that specific workout when they enter the gym. Remember, you don't have a lot of time. You don't have a lot of time. Your client is coming to you. Maybe they're coming from work. Maybe they have a set period of time in between meetings or whatnot where they're coming to you. They want you to know what you are doing and how you're going to execute efficiently. They are not asking you to now come and to show them the new latest and craziest exercise that you saw on TikTok or YouTube or Instagram. They're not asking you to do that. They want you to change them, or sorry, not change them, to train them, sorry, to execute the movements effectively so that they can reach their desired fitness, strength, or muscular goals. So within that, I always say, guys, while you're going through this lecture, and I know it's a recording, but I ask you to just put yourself in the mindset of you can be better. Don't settle for the confinements that society or whatever the case may be putting on you. You can do better. You can reach your dreams. You can achieve anything that you want to within this there that you want to. Maybe you're just learning it for to have basic health knowledge, basic training knowledge, and that's great. But if you also want to change people or train people, sorry, you can aid them in changing their lives. You can aid people in getting fitter. You can aid people in getting healthier. You can aid in people recovering, whatever the case may be. So you do not have to abide by the various stereotypes that are associated with the fitness industry, that are associated with personal training. You can definitely go out there. And I encourage you to pursue whatever your heart's desire, for you to look at role models within the industry, not just within South Africa, but also abroad. because you can do it. So before you start writing down notes or before you start engaging in this lecture, just put yourself in the right headspace that you are here to learn, you are here to understand, you're here to broaden your horizons and to be the best you that you can possibly be. Right. Now, as we crack on, I also want you guys to just think now because it's going to be quite straightforward. And we're going to start off with the muscles of the chest and upper arm. Now, when we look at this specifically, a lot of the time we look at specifically the chest and we just think straight up, because there's incline, flat, and decline bench. Now all of a sudden, that's all we need to do. We do one, two, three, and it's done. I want you to also think about how the chest functions. How does it work? How can you elicit muscular activation, fiber activation? Because it's all fair and well. We can all load one, two, three, four plates on the bench press and we can go and we can count out reps. But if we are not executing properly and if we're not targeting the desired muscle group, you can be there for 3, 4 hours. If you are not training the muscle specifically, it doesn't matter what you're going to do. Yes, there will be elements of growth. Yes, there will be all of that. But if you really want to see progress, if you really want to strengthen the muscle group, and if you really want to improve your training, you have to become specific. Now, that is not saying now that you become specific to the point where you over science it, where you overlook and you almost shed such um, you know, introspection on it, and you almost, are zoning in, magnifying everything to the very single split second. You really are then probably going a little bit too far in that sense because you're then also missing the bigger picture, which is just activating and getting that muscle to function effectively, if that's fair to say. So within that, right, if we start from the left, just so we know our anatomy. We're looking first at the deltoid. I encourage you guys, as I've said before, please start to get used to the medical terminology. Deltoid. Yes, you can use front delt or whatever, but specifically you want to maybe think anterior deltoid, posterior deltoid, medial deltoid, not just your front shoulder or whatever the case may be. The reason why I say that is in colloquial language, yes, when maybe you're chatting with your clients like we're going to be training the front part of your shoulder or whatever the case may be, then that is more applicable. But if you are going to be liaising with other medical professionals, such as biokineticists, physiotherapists, various different sports scientists, or whatever the case may be, if you want to increase your offering, if you want to show your clients or show these other various different individuals that you are willing to work at the highest levels, you very much are going to need to be able to communicate, on a very similar stage. And vocabulary is very important when it comes to that, especially when you start looking at medical reports, especially not saying that you will be, but if you are working with more of these individuals, or maybe you want to work at a sports science center or whatever the case may be, in whatever capacity that would be, you're going to need to be able to understand various different anatomical and physiological terminology. So it's rather start from scratch with learning the full terminology, and then you can apply the colloquial rather than having the colloquial be your bread and butter. And then when you have to apply it, then you left a day late and $1 short. And what you'll also notice is by learning it the long way, when you do write tests, should you write tests or whatever the case may be, or should you construct your projects or whatever the case, you will be able to do so a lot easier rather than every single time needing to have the textbook next to you for you to consult your textbook with regards to what is this doing, what is this doing, what is this mover, um, what is that muscle group, etc. So that's just a point. Now, I'm going to use my laser again. Hopefully you can see it. Now, we mentioned the deltoid. So we have the anterior, we have the medial, and then you also have the posterior, which we'll look at it later. Then with regards to the biceps, your biceps brachii, bi meaning two, tri meaning three. So that's why triceps, there's three heads, biceps, there's two heads. And here you are going to have, here you have the long head, and here you have the short head. Now, you're probably going to be like, well, Cameron, if we train these differently, are we going to be able to have those different shapes of the biceps? You know, sometimes you have um, the biceps that are more peaked potentially. Sometimes you have the biceps that are more elongated. And the honest truth with regards to that is it's all genetic, right? How your biceps are going to look in that sense, not necessarily from a mass and a strength point of view, but from a shape point of view, is pretty much down to genetics. Unless you are going to potentially, unless you have had a potential tear, for argument's sake, in your bicep, and it's now its look has been changed due to surgical intervention, well, then that is a completely different case entirely. But specifically, if we are looking at this, you know, with regards to the actual bicep and its appearance, it is very much genetic with regarding that. So you have your long head and you have your short head. Now, when you look at more along going towards the triceps, we have the three heads. We have the lateral head, which we can see there. We have the long head, which we can see there on the inside. And then we have the medial head. Now, when we look at the posterior view of the muscles of the chest and upper arm, you'll be able to see the tricep slightly better and with the horseshoe and what have you. Now, moving down into going into the forearm, we have the brachialis. And then we have the brachioradialis. So you can see the brachioradialis. Then on this side, coming in and tying into that forearm, you have your pronator teres. And then you also have your flexor carpi radialis. And then you also have here, from a tendonal point of view, you have your bicipital aponeurosis or aponeurosis. Looking at more muscles of the upper arm as well, you have the coracobrachialis. And then, of course, over here, we have your chest with your pectoralis major, and then you also have your pectoralis minor. It isn't depicted on this diagram specifically. Now, when we're starting to look at this, we can really start to gauge what are the three effectively main muscle groups that we can look at here. And here we already have the chest, we have the shoulders, the biceps, and we have the triceps or arms, if you really want to call it. So three: chest, shoulders, arms. And you're already probably thinking, okay, cool, that's the various different days that we may have in the gym. And that is not by coincidence. It also has to do with efficiency, to spread load, to be able to see what is the muscle group that you're training, and to pretty much target it. And why is that? Because often it comes down to feel. I mean, if you think about it, of course, there's execution and all the benefits, but I mean, if you want someone to feel their chest, and if you give them a chest day and they really want to feel like their chest is growing, if you had to just solely focus on the chest for that one workout, you probably would find that they will find better connection to their chest because there's more exercises. They'll feel like there's a bigger pump going to their chest, so they're probably going to feel like it's growing better, and they will over time generate a better mind muscle connection. And that better mind muscle connection will be able to assist them tenfold, especially going forward with regards to their overall growth. Why? Because if they are able to feel it, right? If they are able to feel their chest, if they're able to feel that there's a carryover with their training. You know, a lot of growth does come down to feel. And if that feel is there, then they're going to be much better, much better. Um, you know, from a training point of view, to be able to execute what they need to execute by having that feel. And that's when it comes from there. But if you look at how you're going to divide these up, which we'll look at later in terms of the overall planning of it, you really need to think of what is best for the client and their goals. But before we get to the various different training mechanisms, um, we need to first think of what are the different exercises that we can think of already, so that when they give us their split, we can really think, bang, there's these exercises for chest, there's these exercises for shoulders, there's these exercises for the various different muscle groups. And and a lot of the time, I think it also comes down to execution. And when it comes down to execution with regards to the growth of the muscle, by execution, I'm not meaning, as I said earlier, by putting everything under a microscope and looking at that, but training intensity. I think that's the one variable that a lot of people forget when it comes to training, is in a more modern day approach, there's a ton of people coming into the gym, they on their phones, they have their, their mates sending them stuff, or they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, etc., etc. And they're not really applying the adequate intensity to their training, and then they're wondering why they don't feel the pump. They're wondering why they're not growing. They're wondering why their growth is somewhat stagnating. And the honest truth comes down to the fact that they probably just aren't training hard enough. Excuse me. And you'd probably think within that, if you're saying that they're not training hard enough, well, what does that mean? You're saying that they're not training hard enough. How can you be so sure? And the honest truth behind that is, when you are training more intensely, when you are able to exert yourself, you're pushing the muscle to work harder. You're pushing the muscle to only have an X amount of recovery time to then go again. And you're getting it to be conditioned and to work. And naturally, you're going to, A, expend more energy. So if you're looking at losing weight or whatever the case may be, you're going to be in pushing yourself further to that calorie deficit, depending on how much you consume. And then you're also going to be pushing the muscle to break down and rebuild if more effectively. But if you're going into the gym and and you set the tone as the trainer, and your client's coming in, or your client is giving you feedback when they're training, they very much have a very lackadaisical, relaxed approach, you probably will find that their growth won't be as pronounced as what you probably would expect. And you'll notice the difference between intensity and no intensity, and you'll just be able to see. So you have to think of that, and that you set the tone. Now, when you think of exercise variation, you probably want to do more of a compound movement to start. So if you are thinking of, for example, a a chest exercise, why would we start with a compound exercise first? Well, it's going to incorporate more of the muscles, firstly, and secondly, you want to be able to train that muscle as effectively as possible. Whereas if you isolate it too much, when you then, for example, try to do a bench press later on in the workout, the other muscles that are involved are probably going to do more of the work than the actual chest. Reason being is because the chest isn't as fresh. So if you are able to train more compound exercises and movements first, of course, equipment availability dependent, but ideally, if you are able to put those exercises first, then you will be able to, A, get the most out of that main muscle that you're targeting and not the assisting muscles, but and the other, you know, stabilizers involved. But you'll also be able to then, when you do isolate further on, you'll be able to isolate more slowly because that muscle group has been worked efficiently before, and now there's already blood in it. So when it comes to the isolation movements, that muscle group is really being put on show. It's really being put under tension, and you can slowly but surely stimulate much more effective and efficient growth. So when we look at that, we can really start to think of some exercises. And the main one here, as I mentioned, is going to be the barbell bench press. Now, barbell bench press is a bread and butter of majority of training programs. It's a very big Olympic weightlifting one. It's one of the big three. If you look at your barbell bench press, your barbell deadlift, and your barbell squat. Now, you don't have to do this specifically. It is just one of them. You can also think of other chest presses. For example, you can have a machine incline press, you can have a flat press, you can have a plate loaded press, you can have an incline bench press, you can have a dumbbell bench press, you can have a Smith machine press, there's all of these. I'm sure there's definitely some that I've left out. So the point being is that there are majority, and you probably want to build your chest workouts with a bread and butter of a press movement. From there, you can then go into more isolation movements or potentially other ones. So you can do like an incline chest press or dumbbell press. You can do a flat machine Smith press or Smith machine press, or you can do a plate loaded bench press. You can do an incline barbell or dumbbell press. You can do various ones. And then you can almost go from there into your flies. You can do dumbbell flies, you can do cable flies, you can do machine flies. You can then from there go into other isolation. You can do single arm presses. You can do some push-ups. You can do dips. You can do a variety of other chest workouts. But you started it with that main compound movement, and from there, then you can go into the isolation training mechanisms, as I mentioned before. Now, when you think of the next one with regards to the shoulders, again, starting with more of a compound movement, per se, you could probably start off with like a Smith machine press or a military press or something whereby, you know, um, you are exerting the muscle more from a compound lift point of view, but probably under probably the heaviest load that you're probably going to lift throughout that workout. And then as you slowly go more isolated, then of course the weight would depict the strength of the muscle, of course. And from there, you can probably go more into your shoulder presses, of course. You can do dumbbell press, you can do machine press, you can do various different plate loaded shoulder presses, and you can really start to build a nice workout coming together with regards to specifically shoulders. And by no means am I saying you have to go this way. In the end, when we look at more of how we can group these all together, you'll be able to see slowly but very carefully how you can then start to chop and change, and we can see that in time. And from there you can do your lateral raises, you can do your front raises, you can do rear delt flies, you can do face pulls, various different ways in which for you to target deltoid. And then of course with your arms, they are probably the most, in some cases, overtrained, but also in some other cases, the most undertrained muscle group. Because a lot of the time people think that they are training their arms because they're doing other exercises. So if they're working chest or they're working their shoulders, that just because the tricep is involved in some of those movements, that all of a sudden now they don't need to train their triceps. Same goes for the biceps and training back or any other movements that involve the arms. Just because the biceps are involved in moving the weight and involved in the contraction process doesn't necessarily mean that they are being directly targeted. So for growth purposes, you probably want to target them specifically, or I would definitely advise that you do. Especially when you're trying to grow, probably, training them every day probably wouldn't hurt, or training them as often as possible with as heavy weights as possible, just like any other muscle. And and sometimes in some cases people like to have a day of its own to really ensure that there is the carryover. So I don't know why my light just turned off, but to ensure that there's that carryover with regards to um, the training mechanism and just getting blood into it. I think a lot of the time it is underestimated how important it is to really encourage blood flow, to really encourage fatigue of the muscle and just really getting it to grow. So that is pretty much what you have. And you can already think with regards to arms. You're going to have your dumbbell curls, you're going to have your cable curls, you're going to have spider curls, you're going to have not Smith, easy bar curls, preacher curls, various different hammer curls, various different ways you can train. Um, you're going to have tricep push downs, rope pull downs, you're going to have Rapunzel push downs, you're going to have all these various different tricep exercises, dips, push-ups. Um, but you really want to be able to ensure that you can train that muscle, or muscles, sorry, effectively. So again, a recap of this slide, we have the chest, which we've gone through some of the exercises. You have the deltoid, or you have, sorry, the pectoralis group, and then you have the arms, specifically the biceps, two, again, the long head and the short head, triceps, three, you have the lateral head, the long head, the medial head, and then, of course, you have the various other synergists that are involved. So please note that is how you look at them, and let's look at some of the exercises. Again, just going through them so you can see some of them. If some of you are not familiar, here we have an incline dumbbell bench press with this lady over here. You can see how she's training it, set it up. We have the push-up, which arguably would train all. If you think of it, there's shoulder activation, there's tricep activation, and there's pectoralis activation as well. So push-up is a great exercise. You can use it for warming up. You can use it for your finisher. You can use it to add it to your workout as a superset, and you can really come up with a really, really good workout that can incorporate push-ups as well. And here we have a cable fly, again showing how we can execute various different movements, and a lot of your exercises are also going to be equipment dependent. Some gyms have maybe only one Smith machine. So if you build your client's program entirely around the Smith machine, um, are they going to be able to execute the workout as best as possible? Probably not, no. And that's also where, before you start building the program as well, and you start thinking of exercises, ask them what equipment is available. What gym do they go to? If they say they go to Virgin, if they go to Planet Fitness, if they go to Gold's, if they go to, any other various gym, Fit 24, whatever the case may be, think of the equipment that is there. Ask them, tell me what equipment is there, so you can see for yourself. Or if you are training them, you know what equipment you have. So if you're telling them about this Smith machine, or you're telling them about this barbell bench press, and everything's going to be around the barbell bench press, and you're going to be training them at peak times, what are the odds of that equipment being available? Probably very slim. And hopefully you will be able to use it, of course. But the point being is that if you build it entirely around that, you have to look at your ability to be efficient as well as effective when it comes to your programming. So take those things into account before selecting various exercises, so that you can make as little changes as possible to your program once you have created it, because you know you want to be able to see if it works. You want to be able to learn. You want to be able to have as little variable change as possible, so that you can look at the changes, so that when you do change some variables, you are able to then zone in on that specific variable without thinking about another handful that may or may not be playing a role or an effect. Again, if we look at the arms again, here's a concentration curl, a constant bicep curl. And then here, there's also training some of the forearm muscles here. You have a reverse curl over there that will be targeting a lot of the forearm muscles. And again, you can see some of them here, the brachialis, brachioradialis, the pronator teres, and the flexor carpi radialis. So we can see also training that forearm is also very, very important. Now, if we move on to the posterior side, it is very important. I want you guys to take very careful note of this. You start at the top, and if you work your way down, we start with the supraspinatus. You then work down to the infraspinatus. You work down to the teres minor, and then teres major. So it's almost like a sandwich. You start with big supra, and you end with big major. And then in the middle, you have the two small ones, right? The infraspinatus and the teres minor. Now, what is very specific about here, very important, is that the infraspinatus and the teres minor are responsible for the rotator cuff, right? Now, when you think of your rotator cuff, you think that's the ability of your shoulder to move within its joints. And there's two joints within the shoulder joint, which is why when it comes to training, it's very important to think of the exercises that you choose because of the various different joints. And the first one is when you look at your shoulder blade and you look at that, you have the glenohumeral joint and you have the ball and socket shoulder joint, and your shoulder blades effectively glide. So when you open them out and then they come back in, and then they open out and then they come back in, and they open out and then they come back in. And it's very important to be able to distinguish that, because when you are going to be training, you want to be able to see, are they able to open up? Are they able to press efficiently? Okay, why? Why not? Are there any injuries? Is there any shoulder impingement within there? Do you have to do some band work? Do you have to warm up the shoulder effectively? What is the case? And you need to understand why the shoulder moves the way that it does for you to execute the movement effectively with regards to that individual specific mobility. Because various different exercises will have various different levels of mobility that are required, but each individual has their own unique specific mobility. It would be great if everyone had great shoulder mobility, great knee flexion, great elbow flexion, whatever the case may be. But the reality is not everyone is made the same. Different people have had injuries, different people have different levels of mobility. So before you start this, make sure that you warm the shoulders up properly. Make sure that you warm the deltoids effectively to ensure that when you do conduct your exercises, when you do train your clients, that they are as primed and ready as possible to execute the movements that you have laid out for them specifically. And if you're able to do that, well, then you can only begin to imagine that the carryover of that is going to be 10 times better. So here we look at the back here. We then work down to the triceps brachii. And from the triceps brachii, again, we have the three heads. We have the lateral head, we have the long head, and we have the medial head. So even if we go back to the previous diagram, and we look here. So again, here on the front side, you can see the lateral head there. Then you have the long head there, and then you have the medial head coming down there. So when you now look at this from that side, from the posterior side, now we can start to see the lateral head. We can see the long head, and then we can see the medial head that wraps over there. So when you start to think of this, you can see that horseshoe that is over there, and you can see that why various different exercises like a tricep push down are so effective for training this part, because you can see that it's on show. You can see how these three heads interlink. You can see how they're going to be trained and how they can contribute to the overall shape and musculature of the muscle. Now, the other joint that we were talking about with the shoulder is we have the gliding joint, and we also have the ball and socket joint. Now, in between here, there's an element of space, and that space is called the subacromial space. And a lot of the time, when there's a nerve that runs through that, a lot of the time in that space, when it closes up, sometimes you get a little bit of an impingement. There's a pinch, and that can sometimes be quite sore. That's why working those rotator cuffs to ensure that there's adequate mobility within the shoulder before training would be of the utmost benefit and use to you as well as your clients. Now, when you train the rotator cuff, it's very important that you think of gravity. Why? Gravity goes downwards, right? Pulls towards the center of the earth. So when someone has their dumbbell in their hand and they're doing this, and you ask them, what are you doing? And they say, no, I'm training my rotator cuff. Okay, I understand that you're doing that movement, but if you're just holding a dumbbell, gravity's pulling it down. There's no tension whatsoever on the rotator cuff, right? Just because you're moving your arm side to side does not mean that you're training the rotator cuff. But if you were to have a band coming from this way and you have your band and you're pulling away, then you are going to be adding resistance. Or if you have a cable and you're going to be pulling away, the same as if there's a band from this side and you're pulling that way, you're then going to be able to work the other side of the rotator cuff by pulling inwards. So pulling outwards and pulling inwards. And then the last one is going to be if you're holding something and rotating up and rotating up. Even if as you sit and you watch, you can feel if you put your arm on your shoulder, you'll feel it being able to rotate. Or even if you put almost your hand underneath your armpit, you'll be able to feel that element of rotation and you'll feel it in the joint. And if you are able to do this on most days, or specifically before you train, for example, chest or shoulders specifically, you will be able to probably have an element of relief. You may feel a little bit easier. You may even in some cases feel a bit stronger because you've warmed up the joint there that is going to be underneath that strain and holding up the weight, and you will probably and hopefully be able to increase that output. So this is the posterior side of the shoulder and the upper arm. It is very basic, but it is very important. More often than not, when you look at the basic muscle groups, for example, if you look at chest, it's your pectoralis group. And I mean, you look at that and there is, a ton of different exercises which you can do. But again, it's going to come down to execution and intensity. And that is specific to individuals. The execution will be specific to what can they achieve with their with their physiology from how the muscles have been attached and whatnot. And you'll be able to see that from their mobility and ease of training. And then the other thing is intensity, which we can definitely control as trainers and as individuals. You can control the intensity, and all that it takes is a little bit of hard work. And once you get used to a high intensity, it can be incredibly, incredibly beneficial towards the overall goals and hard work and determination. And if you haven't increased the intensity, don't be so quick to change the plan. If the plan is not being executed efficiently and effectively, then if you keep changing exercises, you can keep changing them until the cows come home. But until there's adequate intensity and adequate execution being administered to the training program, it's going to be very difficult to be able to know what to change to yield a better output, or to even know if change is necessary or required. But if you do not make that change, if you do not make that move to focusing on the various different movements that you have control over, then it's going to be very difficult to focus on things that you may not have direct control over, specifically with the naked eye. So you got to think of that. Now, we've already discussed some of the exercises before, so we're going to go through some of them here again. Here you have your dumbbell shoulder press. So if you haven't seen dumbbell shoulder press, you can set up here. He's doing a standing press. If you had a bar, you could refer to that as more of a military press, but this is a dumbbell shoulder press. Ideally, I like to sit. A lot of the time, people use the short 90-degree bench, but if you really want to try and take some load off of your rotation and trying to hold it there, you can use the bigger benches and just drop it back a little bit. Drop the degrees back so it's almost like this. What will end up happening is your shoulders will be more in line to the weight, and you'll be able to probably press much better and much more efficiently. And that carryover again, if you're able to be more efficient, if you're able to be more efficient with intensity, your chances of growth and your chances of carryover from a strength point of view is going to improve tenfold. But you have to know what you're doing. You have to know that what you are trying to look for. You have to know what the end goal is. But if you do not, as a trainer, if you do not know how to elicit that, if you don't know how to get that out of your clients, it will be very difficult to have that carryover. The next one is we have a skull crusher. That's one that I didn't mention. From a tricep point of view, skull crushers are great. Please be careful with your clients if you are going to do them. Make sure that they understand how to execute them properly. Do they have the confidence to hold the weight up? Is it an exercise that you can feel competent and confident that they'll be able to execute when training on their own? There's all these different things that you got to think of, but it is another incredible exercise for putting some meat on your triceps, for making them stronger. It's definitely one that I thoroughly enjoy. And then dips. This is again a staple. This is arguably a hybrid between shoulders, chest, and triceps. And again, here, depending on how far you lean or how far upright you are, will depict whether it's going to be more tricep or more pectoral dominant. But the shoulders will be used throughout, regardless. So, you know, here's another exercise which requires no other equipment. You can use it, and most gyms have it, and it's just another staple exercise which majority of people can do. Of course, this is using the bars. Of course, if you're at home, you can do dips on the edge of with a chair or with on the edge of your bed or on the edge of a step or whatever the case may be. So that it is quite a nice exercise from the fact that you can use it in various different environments. You can use it, um, with various different levels of resistance. You can possibly use a band to make it easier. You can use a weight belt to make it a lot harder to add resistance. So again, it is another great exercise. And here you can see some of the rotator cuff just working on it. You can see here, with regards to that one, yes, you can probably use the weight set because the dumbbell's pulling down. So if you do want to use a dumbbell for that one, I can understand the purpose behind that. But the point being is that dumbbells will be very difficult. If you do want to use a dumbbell and you are adamant on doing the rotator cuff movements, lie on your side and just open up. Because if you lie on your side, gravity's pulling downwards because your knuckles will be facing down, and you can open up because pointing because they're going towards the ground, and you can open up. Even you can feel while you're sitting wherever you're sitting, you can feel the difference between when gravity is being applied and when gravity is not. Now, arguably my favorite group, we're going to be moving on to the back. And what's really nice about the back is there's so many different exercises you can do, but they arguably, like with any muscle group, you probably need four main exercises that you can go into the gym, that you can execute effectively and get the most out. So when you start to think of the back, we're going to do this opposite. We will probably think of exercises first, is you want to do one where you probably have your elbow going from a lower position to an upper position. You want to almost have one where your elbow is going from a higher position to a lower position. And then you want one where your elbows are traveling along the vertical plane, going from an up to more of a down, and then from a down more to an up, of course, as I mentioned before. And then you probably want one where your arms are slightly wide out, and then one where your arms are slightly narrowing in and pulling in, and one that's pulling in like that. And you'll gradually grow. Now, when you start to think of it, execution is incredibly important when it comes to the back because a lot of the time people lift heavy and they train hard, but the execution is shocking. And when you think of execution, you got to think, what am I trying to target? Because often people start to just grow their lats because they just keep doing pull downs. They'll do pull ups, they'll then do a plate loaded pull down, then they'll do a lat pull down, then they'll do because I see it on Instagram and all of that. They'll do a single arm pull down, and all of you doing all these pulling motions, but you biasing towards specifically the lats. That's not to say that other parts of your back won't also grow with some of these movements, but when you do all of that, you're not really going to be adding much meat or much density to other parts of the back because the way that you've trained has become so biased towards specifically the lats. Now, when you look at some of the training exercises, which we'll get to now, you'll be able to see why different exercises work slightly better than others. But the fun thing is that a lot of the fun equipments in the gyms are more so than not the back and then of course the leg equipment because of the different ways in which you can train those muscles. So it is something that you can look forward to because on those days you're probably going to be able to have quite a lot of variance within your training or within your clients' plans as well, because of course different gyms will have different exercises, and then you'll just be able to learn a lot more. And that's where I encourage you all, if you're able to train in different gyms, if you're able to train in gyms with different equipment, so that you yourself can have experience with training in different equipment. Don't, if you do have a Virgin membership, don't always go to the nice Lani gyms. Go try and train at some of the more entry level Virgin Actives. Sometimes they often have better equipment because they have some of the older equipment, which in my opinion is slightly more uh, old school and more hardcore, and they have, you know, quite nice setups. But try because your clients are going to be coming at you from various different socio-economic backgrounds, and some may have only trained in like high performance centers. Their gym equipment may be very specific. Some may have only trained in CrossFit gyms, so they're only used to barbell work predominantly or kettlebells or whatever the case may be. If you look at other gyms, maybe they used to more quote unquote bodybuilder or techno gym equipment. So you really got to be able to apply that. And the only way you're going to be able to apply that knowledge is by having previous experience within that, because then you can relate to your clients. And that's the one thing that if you're able to relate to your clients much better, you'll be able to see it more on a level playing field. If you're able to discuss with them on a more level playing field, it's just going to increase your ability to program effectively for them instead of shooting in the dark or assuming that you know what it's like, but maybe you don't. And that is the biggest thing that we want to ensure, is that you are able to be the best trainer that you can possibly be. And the only way that you're going to be able to do that is by putting yourself in those situations. So again, without further ado, let's get to some of these muscles. Now, the major muscle group is going to be the back. And as we can see here, if we start on the left, we have your trapezius group. Now, yes, your traps just aren't there, right? They're not just on top of your shoulders. You can see how far inwards they come, and how far down they go. And that is very, very interesting when you look at that, because more often than not, we just bias them to there. But you can see the layering of the various different muscle groups. You can see how it's almost just like layer upon layer. And that's like when you think of training the back, you can't just be so biased towards one form of one line of movement. Um, because there is so many, and a lot of the time people struggle to grow their backs, not because of down to a lack of effort or, as I've said, intensity, but just because of exercise selection. You're arguably doing too many of the same exercises, and there's not that, a pull, one that's more of a wide grip, one more of a narrow grip, and then doing that from the different angles, and that's all you really need to do. But again, we have the trapezius group. You then have the deltoid group. We can see the posterior deltoid, um, more on that side. Then we have the rhomboids. We can see the rhomboids. You can see how there's the different layering already. And then you have the latissimus dorsi. So the lats, you can see that wing. If you ever listen to Arnold Schwarzenegger, you'll be able to hear him talk about how he pictured his lats almost like being a wing, almost like a curtain, coming out. And I think when you think of that, you can see how the lats function. Now, they are very similar to the biceps in terms of insertion points. You are going to get some people who have these big wide lats because they insert lower down towards the hip. You are going to also have some people whose lats insert slightly higher up, but that doesn't mean that you can't train them the same. Then, of course, here you have your spinal erectors. And then if we go to the right, you have your levitator scapulae. You can see that involved in your neck. You see that supraspinatus. You can see it there at the top. Then we have our rotator cuff. Again, we have your infraspinatus and your teres minor. And then you have your teres major. So you can also see how much of the shoulder also plays a role. And you'll see when you come to exercise execution, your ability to round your shoulders and bias part of the back, when squeezing in, and then also to let your shoulders round over when you're trying to train the back on a more, pulling motion, and not just always just have straight back. Excuse me, because sometimes you do want an element of arch. Why? Because you want to be able to stretch the back a little bit, especially with some of your rows or T-bar rows. You want to have that little bit of rounding to get that extra stretch, but to train the various different muscle fibers within the back. As you can see, there's quite a few. Here you can also see the clavicle or your collarbone, and then you can see there's the spine of the scapula. So that, again, part of that glenohumeral sliding joint, which you can then see there. Now, when you think of back exercises, of course you're going to think of a lat pull down, right? It's one of the most common exercises, and that is great. Again, execution is going to be very important here. A lot of the time, people just end up, rocking and rocking and rocking. And not to say that you're not going to have an element of growth, but are you going to be as effective within that? A lot of the time, if you just lower the weight and you almost just sink your shoulders in, and almost think about bending the bar towards your chest, bending the bar towards your chest. And a lot of the time, we're so focused and so egotistical when it comes to weight, because we almost just pull here, you just pull here. If that bar is not making it past your eye line, I'd probably say that you haven't done a complete rep in that sense. Now, I'm not saying that there needs to be this complete science to it, in the sense that, of course, the application of science is great, but I'm not saying that every rep has to be this perfect, touch your chest for 2 seconds, or go up. There can be an element of movement, but if if all you have is movement, then I'd probably say that, especially for novice lifters, I'm not saying for experienced bodybuilders or athletes who know what they are trying to feel, but in this case, for a lot of entry-level individuals, you want to give them specific cues that are going to make them feel that muscle. And a lot of the time, if you ask people when they've trained their back, what are you trying to feel? They don't know. And that's one thing that I would encourage you all to encourage your clients to pay attention to, is what they are meant to feel. So don't feel, you know, bad when you're working with them, and ask them, hey, use your knuckle, and if you know that this muscle is meant to target your rhomboids or whatever the case may be, like, just say, right, feel this, do the exercise, feel this, where I'm touching. I want you to bias to feel that, because all they're going to then do is they're going to make sure their arms are doing the work, because when they get tired and they go that. But if you're able to show them what they're meant to feel, specifically when it comes to the back and where you're trying to do it, and it's very elbow specific. You got to think about where the elbow is driving, from a width point of view to a narrow point of view, from a top to a bottom, or a bottom to a top, if you're thinking of more of your rows, your dumbbell rows, etc. You have to think about where that elbow is going. Even if you're doing a cable pull or cable row, whatever the case may be, if you're pulling, you got to think, are your elbows going straight up to more your abdomen? Are they going to your groin? Are they going more up to your chest? Is it a flat bar? Is it a V bar? What is the case? Because all of that is going to train the back in a different way. Is it an overhand grip? Is it an underhand grip? Is it an overhand barbell row? Is it an underhand barbell row? Because that width is going to train a different part of the back, whereas that narrow part is going to train more of the lats and whatnot, where that the wider one is going to probably train more of the rhomboids. So looking at that specifically, if you notice that the middle of your back is probably a little bit leaner or maybe not as muscular, you can start to very quickly cater for that with different exercises. Now, just because there's so many exercises doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do all of them. When you start to think of your training modalities when it comes to back, you can pick 4 to 5 bread and butter exercises. And if you execute that with adequate technique, with adequate weight application, with adequate intensity, you will grow your back. But what ends up happening is we almost become like children in a candy shop, and we start to prescribe all these different exercises because we just want to pump blood in there. But pump is not going to be the only variable that yields muscular growth or muscle hypertrophy. And that's what we need to, as trainers, get back to thinking about: what is going to grow? What is going to get the best out of the energy that my client is going to expend to get the best growth as possible? And when you start to look at functioning, you can then start to look at what is going to be the best for mobility for my clients as well. Because, for example, if you think of like a barbell row is great. But if you're someone who's possibly trying to, let's say you're trying to compete in bodybuilding, and you need to have a slightly more narrow waist, you've got to be careful when it comes to a barbell row specifically, because if you start to use more of your core to stabilize, that your core is going to naturally get stronger, but then by getting stronger, it's going to get thicker. So when you think of barbell rows, how you execute it, you need to start to look at that. Maybe you're going to more do like a dead row, or maybe you need to move more over to a machine where your core doesn't have to brace as much. But if you're trying to look at strength and putting on mass, especially as a novice lifter, then by all means do a barbell row. But if you look at the barbell row, it's a very technical lift to execute. So are you going to be able to teach the client? Is the client going to be able to administer that technique effectively? And that will be part of the learning process. And that's arguably going to be your value as a trainer, is being able to shift between the two, being able to know what is an exercise that you can easily administer for your clients, and they're able to follow with or without your supervision or your training. What are they going to be able to do? You know, what will require your supervision and what won't. So when you look at that, exercise selection becomes even more important, especially when you look at all the variation that is there. Now, some of the variation, if we get into it here, again with that lat pull down, here you have a face pull. And again, even the variation within that, you have to be specific when it comes to this, because when you look at that, right? It's very easy to look at that angle that's coming down. So you could probably say that's buying more of the posterior deltoid. But is it really? Or is it targeting more of the traps? Because you're pulling slightly more down. It's targeting more of the trapezius. So you need to think of where's that targeting. Would maybe more pulling on a more neutral plane, so pulling directly in line almost to your breastbone, would that target more of the rear delta? Is that targeting more of the rhomboids? Is it targeting more of the trapezius? You got to think about this. It's not just about putting an exercise there being a face pull, but a face pull from where? Face pull from top to bottom, face pull within eye of your line of your eyesight? Are you pulling it to the bridge of your nose? Are you pulling it to your chest? Are you pulling it to your chin? Are you pulling it to your forehead? Where exactly are you pulling it? Because the various different ways in where you're going to pull it will probably yield a different targets or bias to a certain particular muscle group. And when you think of that, you also then think of grip placing. Are you doing an open grip? Are you pulling in line like that? Or are you having a hands over grip where your knuckles are facing down and you want them to pull like that? Because of course, if you have your knuckles facing down, you probably have more of a neutral or 180-degree forearm, which is going to encourage more of that flexion. So you got to think of how you want your client to execute it and what you want out of it for your client. Because, for example, let's say you think I want to do one rear delt exercise and I'm gonna do a row and I'm gonna do a lat pull down and I'm gonna do a cable row and I'm gonna do a dumbbell row. Now, let's say all of those are great. Now you're gonna do this, for example, and maybe you haven't thrown in a rear delt fly because you wanted to do the face pull. But now you've adjusted the face pull to pulling down from that, and how they're executing it is targeting more of the traps and the middle rhomboids. But you've already trained that part, but then you getting all hot under the collar because now all of a sudden the rear delt isn't growing as effectively enough, or that area that you're trying to target isn't seeing that benefit. And it's all coming back down to execution. So you pick exercises that you are confident in, that your client will be confident in, and that arguably has elements of fun. But specifically when it comes to the back, it is quite a nice group because you can fluctuate like similar to the chest, but between different things. There's a lot of ways in which you can mimic the same exercise with different pieces of equipment. It's very easy to if a barbell isn't available to use dumbbells. It's very easy if dumbbells aren't available to use a barbell. It's very easy there's a lot of back machines provided that you know how to use them effectively. um so there's a lot of different ways in which you can train the back, and it's arguably quite exciting. But people do struggle with the mind muscle connection with the back, and the reason that they struggle with the mind muscle connection when it comes to the back specifically is because they can't see it. They can't see their back. When you're training your chest and you can see your chest moving, when you're training your arms and you can see your arms and your muscles contracting, when you're training your legs and you can see all of that. It's the same with the hamstrings. People struggle to grow their hamstrings in some cases because they can't see it. And it's very similar with the back. So that's why, like I said, with the knuckle being able to show, or maybe with a stick or something like that, or a pen, being able to show, right, this is what I want you to feel. I want you to focus on squeezing here with this exercise. This is what I mean when I mean feel this. This is what I mean when I mean pull narrow. This is what I mean when I mean pull wide. What are the differences? If you think of those plate loaded rows, specifically in Virgin Active, like with the narrow grips, where's that narrow grip more going to target? Where's that slightly wider grip going to target? Is it going to, if we grab more towards the end of the handle versus when we grab more wide, whether we grab more up, whether we grab more down, whether our seat is neutral, whether our seat is slightly higher than the bar, whether our seat is slightly lower than the bar, when we're pulling more like this, or when we're pulling more to our chest, or when we're pulling more to our stomach, etc., etc. That is going to slightly bias to target different parts of the back muscle group better or worse for that overall growth. So you need to think about that, especially when you're looking at growing the back and all of that. Granted, I've gone into quite a lot of detail on all of this, but remember, this is thinking further. This, of course, if you just to put together um, a rudimentary or very basic back program, it can be applied across the board. But it's also important for you to think further because there are so many different exercises, and arguably there's a million ways in which you can train the back in that sense. So, various different clients may want to train something different. You want to give something new, something fresh. You do want to change it up now and again. maybe you don't want to change various different things, or maybe different equipment yields different exercises, and sometimes the exercise plan is fixed with some of the equipment. You need to be able to distinguish that on the fixed equipment, what is it going to target? What do you want your client to feel on that equipment? What are the cues that you want them to have? Do they know how to set the seats up properly to target the different areas, etc., etc., etc.? And the different handles that are going to target different parts of the back or for different movements. So, it's not necessarily as simple. I mean, it arguably is as simple as giving a lat pull down, uh, a barbell row, a machine close grip row, and I don't know, chest supported T-bar row, right? You're probably not wrong. It's probably very straightforward in that sense, but overall execution, people get bored. Sometimes, some people are able to do a workout program for a year straight and not have any changes, and they grow fantastically well. There's probably others who grow fantastically well changing their training program a handful of times throughout the year, or ask their trainers to change the handful of program. So you have to be able to cater for all various different members. But the way you are going to be able to make your service offering and your training that much better is if you're able to apply the same level of service, the same level of approach and attention to detail with regards to the different exercises by knowing the way the different exercises are going to target the various different muscle groups and the various different muscles within that muscle group that you are trying to execute. Some of these other exercises are, for example, here you can see the barbell row with this gentleman. You can see the close grip machine row with the V bar. And then you can see here with training more your spinal erectors with regards to the hyperextension. So, for example, if you're training, you can do this cable row, and you can make them do it's not a hyperset, a superset with the back extensions, and that could be a great way. You could, for example, do barbell rows and pull-ups because you're at the barbell rack, and most often than not, at the top of this, there's pull-up handles. So you could do that. So there's ways in which you can train it depending on what you want to elicit, how much fatigue you're trying to look at, the volume that you're trying to train with, the weight, etc., etc. So many different ways, but the back is a phenomenal muscle group to train. So pay attention to it, keep working hard, and the back is the one muscle group that will genuinely reward you for the amount of effort that you put in. It's doesn't necessarily, going to result as much effort, but if you do put in the effort, you will definitely reap the rewards. The same with when it comes to the legs. So just pay some attention to that. Now, let's not forget about the abs. And the abs are a lot more intricate than what people think. Yes, there's your stock standard exercises, such as the plank, such as sit-ups, such as crunches, such as bicycles, etc., hanging leg raises, you name it. There is all of those which can be applied. But at the same time, you also need to understand the abdominal wall and the abdomen in general, because there are a lot of muscles that are involved that give that overall physique. For example, when you look at your serratus anterior, a lot of the time, if you think of Rocky Balboa, you see the leanness there. It's just something nice, if that is nice and lean, but that does form part of the abs. And when you think part of the abs, we just think that they're sit-ups, but no, training it in different ways is going to yield a different appearance to that muscle group, and that different appearance will, in time, of course, definitely yield a different approach. It's going to yield a different way for you to how that muscle looks, and just overall growth. I mean, like, yes, arguably abs are made in the kitchen, but you still have to train it. It's the same with your arms. Like, if you want them to grow, you have to train them. And arguably the same line, like I would normally say with regards to a neurological point of view or neuroscience point of view, same with your brain. People want their brains to work better. People want their brains to function better, but they don't treat their brain like any other muscle. They don't train it properly. They don't ensure that there's adequate recovery. We spend too much time on our phones. So how do you expect the brain to grow if it's always working? And the same with the abs. On the one side, we probably don't work them enough to grow. But yet, when we get lean down, we're then like, well, why don't I have a six pack or an eight pack or a 12 pack? And I want chiseled abs because, I want to walk on the beach or whatever the case may be with the shirt off and whatnot. And if you don't train them, how do you expect them to be on show? Yes, they are effectively made in the kitchen because there needs to be an element of leanness along the abdominal wall for them to be visible, granted, but there still has to be, if you increase their size and their musculature, of course they'll be able to push against the skin a lot harder. They'll take up that space more, and by training them a lot more, you're going to burn, work that area, and over time, you're going to burn more calories, and by burning more calories, you're going to eat away more at the reserves, and eating away at more reserves will make yourself look leaner. And if there is increased muscle mass there, then by all means, it will appear a lot more defined. And there you go. You'll have your abs and you'll be able to walk along the beach feeling quite confident. So let's start off with just looking at them. Of course, here we have the deltoid muscle, we have the pectoral major muscles, but starting here, we have the serratus anterior muscles, and that we can see right there towards the side of our ribs, right towards the upper part, moving towards our armpits, etc. We can see those serratus anterior muscles. Here we can see the back part of the latissimus dorsi muscle. Of course, on some quite bigger chaps, of course, you can see that lat really go out towards the bicep, and of course the armpit and the arm. So you can almost imagine from here, for some people, or even down here, you can see that sometimes they have that big lat that comes out. Sometimes for some people, their lats insert quite high. So maybe it will be more like that. So you never know. Here we also have the linea alba, and the linea alba over here is the division between the left and the right of the abdominals. Here you have your external oblique aponeurosis. So that's for the external obliques. Here you have the external oblique muscle here. Then you have the rectus sheath, which you can see is that thin film going over the muscle groups or over the rectus abdominis muscle. There you have your umbilicus, also, that's where your umbilical cord was cut, or your belly button. And then here you can see the ligament coming down into the groin is the inguinal ligament. We look at from the right side, you have your external intercostal muscles. You can see those, your intercostal muscles are the muscles in between your ribs. We can see the external muscles here involved in different forms of respiration or breathing, and very important with regards to overall strength of the trunk. Here you have your rectus abdominal muscles, and both the external oblique muscles that are coming down. You can see them here. So you can see the external oblique muscles. You can see the internal oblique muscles, and you can see one goes down, one goes up. So you can see how they're going to mesh together. You have the external oblique and you have the internal obliques, which are going, almost running underneath one another like that. Here you have the tendinous inscription. And then, of course, like we mentioned rectus abdominis. What is very important is when you look at pregnant women, or sometimes people have this linea alba where they diastasis recti, which is where that abdominal wall almost shifts apart, and sometimes the abs move, and that is very common in pregnant women because why? The abdominal wall needs to open up, right? Because they need to make space for the womb and space for the fetus and the baby. So when they go over, sometimes the abdominal wall separates, and that starts there at the linea alba. So that's also something new that you have learned, and you will learn as time goes on. When you look at more special considerations, you look at pregnancy, and you'll be able to see why different exercises cater for pregnancy. Why do we make them do various different exercises or perform different exercises in a different way? It's because there is, in some cases, that splitting of the abdominal wall, which does occur. In some cases, it can split and it needs to be surgically reattached. In other cases, that may not necessarily be the case, depending on the severity. But for the nutshell of it, you can see there's all these various different muscles. And as we said, you're going to train the abs like any other muscle. You're going to train them with the elements of intensity. You're going to train them with the elements of resistance. Not just about cranking out 30 sit-ups and Bob's your uncle and off you go, and now you're going to have chiseled abs. If you want the muscle to grow, you have to train it effectively. You have to give it enough volume. You have to give it enough stimulus. You have to give it enough juice to be able to produce what you want it to produce. And that's where we look at some of the exercises. Here you have a bridge. great for stability, great for strengthening the overall trunk. And if you have a strong core, you will naturally be stronger in general because your center of mass will be surrounded by a stronger lift. And by sometimes training your abs before you train, for example, back or even legs, where postural integrity is going to play a role, and you're going to be able to or required to flex your abs for that stability, you'll find that you actually get much better execution because there's muscle there, there's not muscle, there's blood in the abs. You're able to execute it more efficiently. You're able to produce more effectively, and you'll be able to just produce a lot better. So I encourage you to pay more attention to your abs. I encourage to have your clients pay more attention to their abs because the carryover will be quite significant. And when I say carryover, if you're able to have a stronger posture, you're able to be able to make sure that the muscle group that you're trying to target doesn't have to be catered for by the abs in that sense, because they'll be strong. You'll be able to focus solely on training your back, for example, or training your legs, and not necessarily be hindered due to a weak core. So especially for people who work sedentary jobs or they work office-based jobs or whatever the case may be, or they're sitting down. If you have a strong abdomen, you'll be able to sit up for longer. You'll be able to feel more stronger. That will reduce in less neck pain, etc. Because their body and their trunk will be able to hold them up to for the length of the day. So there is more than just looking good when it comes to the abs. Now, arguably my favorite muscle group. I know I did mention the back earlier, but arguably my favorite muscle group here, and that is going to be the legs. The legs are quite straightforward, of course, because pretty much everyone trains legs and we can see them, so we're able to look at them and we're able to identify the various different muscles effectively and accurately. So when we look at that, there is a lot of benefit when it comes to that. Now, looking at this, we'll start from the left. And we'll start with the gluteus medius. The glutes are the strongest muscle in the body, relatively speaking. Because when we look at the back, look at the size of that. The size of that. There's so much power, especially when you look at the core part of your body. You look at your glutes, you look at your abs. Um, they vary are from a power and a force production point of view very, very important into ensuring that you are strong from a stability point of view. Your glutes and your abs are very, 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 very important. So we started with the gluteus medius. As we work down, we work into the quadrilateral group, the quads. Now, when you think of the quads, I don't want you to refer to them as the quads. In your mind, think they are the quadriceps. Quad meaning four. What are them? Label them, name them. When you think you're training the quads, keep telling yourself quad meaning four. What are the four? You have your rectus femoris, as we can see here. You have your vastus group. So in the vastus group, there's three. One isn't mentioned here, but I'll tell you it. There's three. There's your vastus lateralis, your vastus medialis, and your vastus intermedius. So it's or limb, right? LIM. Lateralis, intermedius, medialis. Right? Now, if you think of that, you have your rectus femoris, you have your vastus group, and that forms the quads. Um, and when you think of the the quadriceps, you can then start to look at them and think of what they're going to do. Now, when you think of them and how they're going to function, you know, it's not just always about just doing a leg extension, right? Or doing a squat, you have to think of how many movements you are doing where the muscles are coming together and the muscles where they're being pulled apart. And a lot of the time when we do the leg extension, we're just so focused on the contraction part of the movement that we don't think about how you have the elongation movements where you almost stretching the quad muscles to ensure that they're able to function effectively, to ensure that you have that overall shape. But we then start to stuff around with moving our feet closer, turning them in, moving them out, turning them out. We're trying to focus more all on all of that nonsense, right? Before just training it properly, before just training it hard, before understanding that there are four different parts. You have your rectus femoris and your vastus group, again, a lateralis, intermedius, and medialis. And when you're looking at that, then you're able to start to think, right, what do I need to feel to grow more outwards? If I put my feet more closer, because remember, everyone's hips are different. Everyone's hip joints are different as well, and how your body is put together. So not necessarily everyone who gets onto a leg press, for example, and puts their feet like this is going to feel that. You need to take it on a case by case basis, and then you can apply the science. Then you can apply your anecdotal experience. But more importantly, people struggle when it comes to leg development, and especially quadricep development and hamstring development, because it is hard. The legs are incredibly demanding from an oxygen and nutrient point of view. They sap it, and it's tough because you're going to feel tired. You're going to feel like you don't have any more, and you're going to have to give more. You genuinely want to grow your legs. If you genuinely want to get stronger, you are going to have to encourage your clients to put in a hell of a lot of effort. And you guys know how much effort it has been. And if you don't, encourage yourself to push yourself harder if you're not seeing better results, or work with the coach who is able, excuse me, to get that out of you. Um, and that really is important when it comes to overall leg growth. And then you can start to play around with different angles in that maybe will do better. But again, like I said, individuals' hip mobility is very different to from one to the next. So you do have to take it on a more case by case basis. But anyway, that is that part. Then if we look here, you also have your peroneus longus. Now moving to the bottom part of the leg, your extensor digitorum longus. You have your tibialis anterior, that's mainly the front, the shin muscle. Moving over to the right from the bottom up, you have your soleus and your gastrocnemius. They form your calf muscles. You have your patella, also known as your kneecap. Then you have your adductors, right? Don't forget your adductors. You have your adductor longus, and then your sartorius, your pectineus, and your iliopsoas. Now, when you think of your adductors, no, adductors, sorry, adductors. When you think of your adductors, there's a difference between adduction and abduction, right? Ab, going away. So when you're doing your exercise, that's the one when you're sitting in the chair and you push out, you're going to feel more of your glutes there because you're pushing away, abduction. But when you're training your adductors, you are doing adduction, meaning adding, you're bringing together. You're bringing your legs together. 1 + 1 = 2. So you bring them together. So when you come together, that's generating that adduction motion, that adduction movement. And when you come together like that, you are performing adduction. So when you there's a ton of carryover from training your adductors, like we said with the core, especially, but in terms of overall leg development and filling almost that thigh gap, but also encouraging better depth to squat, better stability with the squat. The adductors are really, really important, and they often go undertrained, specifically in males. Guys, you are not going to be any less masculine if you go and you sit on the adductor machine and you train your adductors. But even when you train them, it's not about just training them from there to there and just almost going heavy because you can do full stack and you can just almost like just go da da da. It's also about opening up the hip girdle, opening wide and getting that stretch, and then bringing it in under load and training that and as maximizing your mobility. That is where the true growth is going to be when it comes to your adductors. That is where the true growth is going to come in with regards to improving your squats, improving your quad growth or quadricep growth. Again, remember your quadricep, that's your rectus femoris, your vastus medialis, your vastus intermedius, and your vastus lateralis. So that is going to what's going to be able to benefit there. And why? Because it forms an element of support. The same as when it comes to your to your glutes to a certain degree. If you're able to have the surrounding muscles be nice and strong, specifically your adductor group, you will be able to function much better. And also in terms of getting that full leg look, when you fill up the thigh gap with the adductors, you're going to have a more well-round leg, especially if you're looking at more bodybuilding, but even if you look at from an athletic point of view, to generate that force production, if you're able to have the adductors which are able to stabilize, especially when you look at sport or sprinting, the carryover is going to be very, very beneficial, especially from a force production and a stabilizing point of view. So that is what we are looking at here. And again, while we're looking here, we have the calf muscles, we have the gastrocnemius and the soleus. And when you look at the calves specifically, again, it's another part of the body that often goes undertrained because we think that when we do a leg press, when we do a barbell squat, or when we do a hack squat, when we do all of them, that they are getting enough attention. Still train them. If you want your calves to grow, train them. Train them along different planes, train them along different exercises, train them like you would any other muscle, right? Train them to an element of fatigue, you know, get blood flow into them with the elements of intensity. But a lot of the time we just ignore it. Why? Because yes, we extend ourselves quite vigorously when it does come to leg training, but then often sometimes yes, it is a little bit harder to have that carryover um at the end when you want to go home and you're tired and now you still need to do some calf exercises. So you can always throw them in on your upper body days if you when you train your upper body. And that is where you can also see some benefits is maybe training them on a day or training them first. Train them first on your upper body days where you can feel them specifically. Maybe not at the end of a leg day when you're going to try and train them at the end of a leg day and you're just going to you're tired, you don't necessarily maybe have the energy to focus solely on them, and that will also, in its own case, effectively limit some of its growth. But if you are able to train them effectively, well, then focus on that. Now, some of the anterior parts for leg training, of course, you have your leg extension, which majority of gyms have, even small gyms. You have your squats, various different squats. You have a front squat, as you can see this lady is executing here. You can have your barbell back squat. You can have a pendulum press, you can have a hack squat, you can have a goblet squat, you can have a kettlebell squat, you can, like various different ways. Here you have a lunge, great exercise, incredibly, you know, um, taxing. You can also do an exercise which will make pretty much any individual feel like they've been put through war is a Bulgarian split squat. Great exercise. Of course, how far forward you put the front leg or how far back you put the front leg will dictate if it's going to be more quad or more glute dominant. So pay attention to that. Pay attention to how upright your back is or how far forward you are leaning. Try not round your back. Try keep a neutral spine. But yes, you can move a little bit more forward or back depending on the requirements of mobility for your hip. And the same here when you train it. So of course, when you think of more of your practical exposure, get into the gym, train these things. Use yourself as your own guinea pig. After this lecture, when you go to the gym in the next week, train these various different muscle groups. Train and see what do you feel? What is the best combination? How do you feel? Do more of your compound movements first, such as your barbell squat, then transition into more your isolation. How do you feel? Warm up the knee properly. Make sure you start off with warming up your knee, warming up your hips. For example, you can do you don't have to get it to failure, but you can do 2 sets of 30 light reps on the leg extension, 2 sets of 30 light on the leg curl. Now you've warmed up your knee from the front and the back. Then you can go and do your adductors. Then you go and squat, and you'll feel the difference. You'll feel your force production is going to be much, much better. Whereas if you just get to the gym and you cold turkey, just go slap on 2, 3 plates and you try and squats, and then everyone wonders why they get hurt. So specifically for your clients, especially when they train legs, often people want to get in, get out, especially on leg day, because they know it's going to be hard. But again, the same principles apply. intensity and efficiency. If you can be efficient and you can be intense enough and you train hard enough with the correct programming, which you will apply for your clients, then the carryover should be very, very good. Now, when we look at the posterior side of the leg, starting at the top, we have the glute medius. You then have the glute maximus. So you can see there. Um, again, yes, the max is the bigger part. So know that. Going down the left, you have the iliotibial tract. And what goes in the iliotibial tract is the ITB. So this is the ITT. The ITB runs in the ITT. And the ITB is your iliotibial band. The ITB runs in the iliotibial tract. Then you have your hamstrings, the same as your quadriceps, your vastus group, and your rectus femoris. So vastus lateralis, vastus medius, and your vastus medialis. Now your hamstrings, again, ladies and gentlemen, are your biceps femoris, your semitendinosus, and your semimembranosus. These three here are your hamstrings, right? So when you think of your hamstrings, when you're training your hamstrings, you can see them all here. You have your going from outwards inwards. You have your biceps femoris, your semimembranosus, and your semitendinosus, right? Please know those. And then here, then you have your calves, and you have your gastrocnemius, and you have your soleus, and then you have your calves. And then, of course, here you have your gracilis. Now, when you think of training these, again, a lot of the time we neglect our glutes. They're the powerhouse, of our core within that, being able to execute properly. If you think of runners, if you think of anything, the glutes form part of your core. So having that stability and training them is going to be really, really important. And you'll train them in a carryover a lot of different things, from squatting to hip thrusts to lunges. So you need to think of, are you training them effectively? Do you need to change it up differently? And there will be carryover. Of course, it is individual specific. You can do donkey kicks, you can do um leg raises, you can do all those various different things to train different parts of the glutes, as well as the hamstrings, from hamstring curls to seated hamstring curls, to single leg curls, to Romanian deadlifts, to straight leg deadlifts. You can do that with dumbbells, you can do it with a barbell, you can do it with a Smith machine, you can do it with kettlebells. You can even to a certain degree probably use bands, depending on how much resistance that band is able to yield you. So, and then you can also see a carryover when you go to, for example, a leg press, placing your feet slightly higher or lower. Granted, leg press is predominantly a quadricep exercise, but there is, to a certain degree, with a squat or with a leg press, activation of the hamstring, but it is not a direct hamstring exercise. So your hamstrings, there will be an element of activation with them, but it's probably more beneficial if you do want to grow your hamstrings. Make sure you do hamstring exercises. Make sure you feel them. Make sure you set up correctly. Make sure that you're not using a lot of rocking and backwards and forth. And these are all different cues that you're going to have to give to your clients, because I'm sure all of us can agree, specifically with legs, when you go into the gym and you see people training, that their heart's in it. They're giving a lot of intensity, but the execution, again, as I said, you need execution and intensity. And a lot of the time when it comes to legs, it's just because we so weight focused, because we don't want to be seen doing light weights or whatnot. But if you can execute effectively, with time, the weight will improve. And that's what you just got to look at. That's the payoff that you got to look. Are you trying to um, you know, generate more of a physique look? What are you trying to do? And that's where I would also say to people, just because you're going to do more muscle building exercises does not mean that you are by default going to look bulky or whatnot. Ladies specifically, if you want more toned legs, or if you have clients who want more toned legs, you can make them do squats. You can make them do lunges. excuse me, you can make them do leg extensions, hamstring curls. It's not the carryover unless from a nutrition point of view, you're making them do, eating high amounts of calories, etc., then you're probably going to get more of a bulkier look, but it will develop a nice, um, formulated and sleek and streamlined and aesthetic look. So it really does have many different applications, but you as a trainer are going to be what is important to set that tone for your clients. So please do take that into account. Now, some of these exercises we can see here, of course, you have the calf raises, you have your hamstring curl, and again, here specifically, make sure where the hip goes. Make sure that when you do it, you're pointing your toes out. You're not biasing the calf to get the weight up. That you're not necessarily rocking specifically. Granted, there is various different experience. Some people do have a little bit of a rock because they feel it more in the hamstrings. Of course, this is a case by case basis, but where possible, try and teach good technique first and make sure that that technique is relatable to the client. And then, of course, here, for example, if you want to do a little bit of a donkey kick or a rear leg raise, or, to train more of the glutes, you can put the dumbbell in the bend of the knee, and you can use it that way because sometimes cables may not be available. 9 times out of 10, gyms have dumbbells. So even for some of your clients, even if they work at home, maybe they bought themselves a pair of dumbbells, they can also have a nice leg workout at home. And those are the various different muscle groups again. So we started off with the chest or the pectoralis group. We looked at the anterior deltoid. We looked at the biceps and the triceps. Remember, biceps, there's the two head. There's the two heads. The triceps, there's the three heads. Then we went from there into the posterior side. We looked at the gliding joint. We looked at the ball and socket joint. We looked at the rotator cuff, the infraspinatus, and the teres minor. We then went from there. We then looked at at the back. We started to then look at the various different muscles of the back. How can we train that more effectively? We then looked at the muscles of the abdomen. How can we train those more effectively? We then looked at the muscles of the anterior side of the leg. Remember the quadriceps, four, meaning, you have your rectus femoris, your vastus group, so your vastus lateralis, your vastus intermedius, and your vastus medialis. And then, of course, you have your calves. Remember, you have your soleus and your gastrocnemius. With regards to that, don't forget your adductors, your adductor longus, and you use the adductor machine or adduction to produce growth there. Don't forget that that is different to abduction, moving away from the body, so pushing your legs out. Then we looked more at the posterior side of the leg with regards to the glutes. Don't forget your glute maximus and your glute medius. And then, of course, your hamstrings. Don't forget that that is your biceps femoris, your semimembranosus, and your semitendinosus. And then you formulate the various different exercises. And that is really what we want to do. I try to make sure that this is nice, short, and concise. You don't need to have 3 hours about this. You know what the muscle groups are, but it's just about knowing what they are and various different exercises that you can do. So then you can construct your various different things adequately. So when you start to think of that, it's really important that you start to cater for the various different individuals that you're going to have, because now that you've gone through the major muscle groups, now that you've gone through the different exercises, now you can start to plug and play when you're chatting to your clients and you do those initial screenings and whatnot with your clients, or if they ask for a workout, or your friends ask or family ask you for a workout, you ask them, how many times a week are you trying to train? If it's just a 1 day, cool, you can put together a leg workout. You know the various different muscle groups of the leg. You know that there's the various different exercises, what equipment do you have. You can really start to think, this is the different exercises by targeting these different groups. You're going to have a full leg workout in terms of that. um, the same way is if you look at, if someone says they only have 3 days a week to train, maybe you're going to do full body, maybe you're going to do a push pull legs. Is there going to be enough volume to elicit growth? What are you trying to execute? Are you going to do one muscle group a day? If they want to train 5 days a week, is that going to be efficient enough? How's that going to work? If you're looking at 5 days a week, are you going to do an upper lower kind of split? Are you going to go upper lower, full body? There's very different ways you can do it. But now you're able to plug and play various different splits or create your own split. You know, for example, if you look at Arnold, Arnold used to do chest and back on the same day. If you chat to different people, some people think you can, some people don't think you can. You can try it out. You can see, test it for yourself. Don't just because someone says that it's so, doesn't always mean that it is. You know, specifically when it comes to training, learn from other people. Take time to work with other trainers, shadow them, see what they do, listen, talk, learn. Go onto YouTube, watch some people, watch from more science-based lifters, watch more anecdotal-based lifters, watch bodybuilders. What do they find? What are they feeling? What are they trying to execute? Of course, various different levels of experience you're going to be able to associate with that. But the main thing is mind-muscle connection, intensity, and execution. If you can do all of those, and if you can execute an adequate plan, of course, the plan has to be there. You have to be able to have a plan and have created a program that is going to, in its own right, be efficient to generate growth. Then you apply the execution, the intensity, and the mind muscle connection. And all of those together with adequate, of course, nutrition, but just from a training point of view, then you can ensure that the carryover to your clients, their goals, what do they want to achieve? What's the look that they're trying to get? What is the output of the muscle groups that they want to be able to achieve? Are they trying to run a race? Then you probably look at more volume. Do they want to just bulk on strength? And you're probably looking to less volume, trying to push more strength. What are they trying to achieve? Are they trying to look at more of an overall physique? Are they trying to look at muscle growth, etc., etc.? And then you can start to cater a much better response. So that is our lecture for today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I do apologize once again that there is a recording, but hopefully you'll be able to enjoy it. Hopefully you'll be able to have a best Saturday. The Springboks do play later today, so wishing them all the best. But I hope you guys have a great day. I hope that you're all able to follow along, and I hope that you've learned something new. Keep pushing yourselves to be better. I believe in you. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to contact me, or please first contact your tutors. Make sure you contact them. Make sure that you're able to get the adequate information from them. Work hard, ask them questions, but don't go empty-handed. Make sure you've checked your work. Make sure you've done elements of research before just asking open-ended questions. Make sure then you can bring something to the table that you can have an informed conversation, and then you can take it from there. So keep working hard, guys. Again, thank you so much for attending today, and have a great day. And I'll see you guys in the next one.